Good evening or good morning. I know many of you will be watching the recording of this rather than the live session now, but it's good to have you here this evening. We've got about half an hour of information to tell you, and then the space for questions as well, if we haven't covered everything. So this is to talk a bit about the research project that we've been doing with the schools and the SEK schools in Spain and France and Qatar and elsewhere. And we've been putting these little boxes into the rooms, and I'll tell you more about these as the time goes on. But we're really interested in the physical environment in the classroom, in the learning space, and the ways in which that will affect people's ability to be learners, to think, to be clever. And I'm going to go through the 7 different things that we're measuring and talk a bit about why each one is important, and then maybe summarize where I think we are. So let's start with maybe with CO2. And CO2 is pretty important in terms of learning. Here in the room that I'm in my workspace. This is my exercise equipment behind me. You can see it's not working so good. But I can measure the CO2 in this room because I'm breathing in oxygen, I'm breathing out CO2, and that gives me quite a high score actually at the moment. The CO2 here is 1,400 parts per million, almost 1,500, and that's already too high. If we were in a classroom, that would lead me to be a little sleepy. My brain would be less alert. My concentration would be lower. And I could not be the best that I could be because the CO2 is too high. So all I'm going to do as we talk, I have a window alongside me here. I'm just going to open the window and let in, you can see it's dark outside, I'm going to let in the fresh air. And we'll see how quickly the level goes down. We measure CO2 in parts per million, ppm. And when we started this work 5 years ago, we thought that maybe 2,000 parts per million, 2,200 to be precise, was the level at which your concentration would be less good. But actually, as the research has gone on, other people around the world have been measuring CO2 and its impact on our brains, and the consensus now is it's a figure as low as 1,000. Let me show you what that looks like in a typical school when we start measuring the CO2 across a day. So here is I'll just dip down a little bit here, but here is the CO2 in a classroom in a school. There are 27, I think, children in the classroom. You can see they come in the morning here, and the CO2 builds up as the day goes on. The measure down the side here is parts per million, and across the bottom is time. So as the morning starts, the CO2 builds up, and we get to a peak here at break. The children go out for break, and the CO2 dips down a little bit, and then it goes up again until lunch. And then they go out for lunch, the doors are open, they run around, the CO2 drops, but as they come back after lunch, even with the windows open, the CO2 stays quite high. And the reason for the yellow line here, this yellow line, is that's the level of 1,000, above which your brain doesn't do so good. So for these children, as you can see, they come in and really they only have 20 minutes in the morning, and then the CO2 is already stopping them being as smart as they could be. Here's another set of data, and here you can see This is the same school across a year. So this is almost a year right across here. And the blue line was the CO2 before we started measuring it, and it's way too high. The yellow line is the CO2 this last year, and you can see it's much lower, it's down, and it's under control. So an interesting question is, how do we control it? And clearly we can't put the children in gas masks, or even the COVID masks don't help. So what we do is we look for something that can turn CO2 into oxygen. Of course, we know what that is because biology tells us this is what plants do. So here is a plant, one of the ones we're using in the classrooms, and we're using one plant per child. And I'll show you what that looks like. Here's a group of children in a classroom. You can see they're all looking after their plant wall over here. Each child has their own plant. Every plant has a name. So let me just come out of there a second. Every plant has a name. This one is called Monica, and they look after their own plants. And of course, they learn a lot about biology and husbandry, and a little bit of STEM because they make little self-watering kits from Arduino boards and all sorts of things. So the plants become more than just a device to change the CO2 into oxygen. But that's the thing that they do really well. And when we do that, remarkable things happen. Let's go over to Dubai for a moment, and let's have a look at what happens when we put a plant wall into a lot of classrooms in Dubai. And Asha Alexander is the head teacher who's leading the research over there. I think in the end they put a plant wall into 162 different classrooms, and you can see here, I think this is the sort of academic results before and after. Green is after, blue is before. You can see this is by subject here. The orange is after, the blue is before. So academic performance got better, of course, because you have more oxygen for your brain. But if you look up here, this is the data for an individual child, and you can see, I think, there that the impact on individual children, they fidget less, they concentrate more. Everything got better. So there's CO2, and that's one of the things we measure. And let's just go back to our little learnometer boxes, and a lot of these boxes are now in the SEK schools, and I think more coming now. So we're measuring your children's environment to see how good we can make it. But if we just go to here, I can look at the temperature, which I'll come back to in a moment. I can look at the humidity, 60%, but CO2 is already way down. So all I've done is open the window to let in the fresh air and let my breath out of the room. And there's only me in the room. There's nobody else. This is a hat. There's nobody in the hat, you know. And the CO2 had dropped to 600. So in the time we've been talking, it's gone from nearly 1,500 down to 600. So terrific difference. So what else impacts on your children's brains? Well, quite a lot of other things, actually. Let's have a look at light next. So light is quite complicated because we want the light to be bright, but we also want it to be very, very white. And I can just show you the difference there if I just play with the lights in this room. So on this side of the room, I have a traditional light bulb, which is really quite yellow. And when I turn it on, you'll notice I go, you know, the red in my face comes up and the yellow. And on the other side of the room, I have an LED bulb, which is very white, and you can see it's a whiter light. And hello, Danielle. It's a whiter light, and it makes a difference. Now, we know that the best light for children to concentrate is a pure white, very bright light. And a lot of controversy about this because some We've met some teachers. We found one in Australia. I know there's some Australians watching this, but we found one in Australia who said he liked the light to be really very low in the classroom because the children had very good behavior, but actually they were just asleep, you know. Your brain sort of shuts down as it gets darker. So we measure lux, we measure the light level in lux, and you can do this actually at home with your own phones if you want. It's free, you know, lots of free apps that simply measure the light level. So I'm going to use my phone. I'm going to point it over this side of the room, and I've got over there 391 lux. And if I point it over to this side of the room, it's quite a lot brighter. I've got 2,000 lux. So we're trying to hit 500 lux to keep our children as alert as possible. And most of the classrooms I'm building around the world, we're aiming for 1,000 lux, which is a very bright light. And to get the whiteness, we're looking for a thing called the Kelvin value of the light bulb. Now, if I buy a light bulb in my local hardware store, if I look on the front, it just says, you know, it gives me some numbers for brightness, but it doesn't give me the number for the Kelvin value unless I look very, very, very carefully. And you can just maybe see there, it's really hard to see. But the Kelvin value of these bulbs are 6,500, and you're trying to find bulbs that are brighter than 5,000. So these are very good bulbs. What does that look like in the classroom? Well, it looks very bright. And if we look at where should we go to see this? Let's have a look at maybe this is our learning laboratory in UCJC in Madrid. And you can see how many white LED lights there are down the middle, how white all the surfaces are. This is a little school just down the road from where I live in England, and the children in here weren't really performing their best. They're lovely children and a really good teacher. Let me say, by the way, there's still no substitute for a really good teacher. Even if you have plants and light bulbs and everything else, you still need a good teacher, you know. But you can see here how bright the LED lights are on the ceiling, how white the walls are. And the performance of these children went up so much that the teacher that had them last year said she had to check the register to see if they were still the same children, because the performance was so much better. She couldn't believe they were the same children. Nothing wrong with the children, of course. It was the room that was making them shout. And if I go to England, this is the most expensive school in England. This is Eton, where most of our government went to school. That's nowhere. Our government aren't very good at the moment, so it's not much of an advert. But look how white the room is. Look how bright it is. Look how much light there is. Look how all the reflective surfaces are white. So you can see this is a route that many are taking because the research evidence is clear. Bright light makes for good brains. And by the way, parents watching this, you might say, well, what about my my son, my daughter at home when they do their homework? You know, we always have an argument, and I'm saying you must finish your homework. They're saying, oh, I've been up here 2 hours, it's long enough. When you make the room as good as it can be, you'll find they finish their homework quicker, they get better results, you don't argue. You need the room to help them be as smart as they can be. So what else makes a difference? Well, I won't spend so long on all the others, or we'll be out of time. But certainly if I go to noise, it's pretty interesting as well. And noise, you know, all teachers will tell you that when the classroom gets too noisy, it's hard to concentrate. When you're driving your car and the children are in the back all having an argument, it's really quite hard to concentrate. And actually, when those cars go past you in the middle of Madrid and the noise is too loud, at that point, the music stops them being good drivers. They become dangerous drivers because the sound is so loud. So we're trying to get to 75 decibels, and lots of ways of measuring that. Again, you can measure it with your phone. Obviously, the little anemometers measure that as well, but I can show you what happens, because when we give the numbers to the children, they say, oh, don't worry, we'll be in charge. So these two children in a school in Islington in London are in charge of sound for today, and they have an iPad over here on the wall, and it's measuring how noisy the class is. Not very noisy. It's a great class, actually. But if the needle goes up into the orange sector, then these two will jump up and go around and shush everybody down. So keeping the class quiet becomes a job for the children, not for the teacher, because the children want to work. You know, they always want to be their best, and they know that being too noisy gets in the way. But if the teacher has to shout, be quiet, you know, how does that help make it all quiet? So giving the power back to the children is a really powerful way to do it. And we've seen some interesting results from all this. Here's some. This is two classrooms. The yellow classroom is a very large class. There are 92 children in the class. The blue one, I think there are 27 children in the class with the door shut. And you can see that the very big class, the children come in the morning, they make a lot of noise. Everybody shouts at you, hello, did you watch that film last night? You know, how's your mother? And then they just get on with their work. And you know, here is 60 decibels, which is really quite quiet. So it's hard to get my finger on that, but you can see 60 decibels. 600 instead of that 60. And then they carry on during the morning. They have a little plenary session when the teacher talks to them all. They go to lunch. They come back from lunch and they'll say, oh, did you have the paella? You know, and then they quieten down. They get on with the work. And that's a huge class, nearly 100 children working really quietly because they're aware of the noise. We've given them the data. The other class, 27 children in a traditional classroom, and you can see they come in, they don't say very much to each other. And then as the morning goes on, they start getting noisy. The school says they have to go to lunch early because they can't concentrate. Well, they can, but they can't concentrate on all that noise. And then after lunch, look, it's noisy, be quiet, noisy, be quiet, noisy, be quiet, noisy, be quiet, very noisy, go home. So this is all a little counterintuitive. The problem is not a lot of children. The problem is the children being aware of the noise and trying to get it down as low as it can be. So as well as noise, we have this one is interesting in England at the moment, because just today we have a court case in London with I think the court was in London, the girl was further north, where the pollution around the school was shown to be a cause of death of the poor little girl in the school, who was breathing in PM 2.5. These are little particles of dirt, of soot. If you're following a diesel car, the black soot is coming out of the back. That soot is really quite dangerous, because it's pulling the window shut a little bit because I've got mosquitoes coming in now. I have to start swatting them. But those little soot particles are dangerous when you breathe them into your lung. They reduce the amount of oxygen, they cause inflammation, but they also can carry the coronavirus sitting on. Imagine a little soot particle, the virus sits there going, oh, I'm here for the ride, and it gets into your lung by hitching a lift. Now, we know that in China, a huge research project measured, I think, over 50,000 children who were in school near quite heavy pollution, by which they meant very busy roads. And by the time the children got to be 15 years old, on average, they dropped a year of schooling. So these nasty little particles are really quite damaging to your health, but they're really damaging to your learning. And that's why we're measuring them in the classroom and trying to get them down as low as we can. And whilst we're on pollution, it's worth also looking at the Here we go, the TVOCs, which are, these are the sort of nasty smells you get when you, teachers will recognize if you take the top off your whiteboard pen, there's quite a smell there of the solvent, or if I do some gluing, or if I do some cleaning. And TVOCs, which are, well, we're measuring 50 different sorts of TVOCs, but these are volatile organic compounds, and the total of them is damaging to learning. And I'll show you a slightly scary graph, because when we started with COVID, we knew, we knew in the SEK schools it's really important to shut the toilet lids, because when you flush the toilet, aerosols go whizzing off. But we also found here, this is just before school started, and this is actually one of the Australian schools, not our Spanish schools. You can see there the day goes la 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 la, and then suddenly, just about 6:30 in the morning, the TVOCs absolutely go huge. I think we'd never seen figures like this before. And then they come down, but they don't come down. They come down to there. I should have shown you the rest of the graph. They come down to there and then keep going too high. And that had happened because we were deep cleaning. People were, because of COVID, they're spraying the surfaces and we're washing our hands with good, very strong hand washes. And unfortunately, although that cleans the room, it also turns out it cleans the brains, So we're trying to measure all these things in our classrooms and see what the impact is of all that. And just a couple more, really, and then some general things, and then we'll jump into some questions, really. But it's worth also looking at temperature, which I've got here, I think. And this one's really easy, because to be in the perfect conditions for learning, you want to be between, it should be 18 and 21. I think I mistyped that. I do apologize. 18 degrees and 21 degrees. And, that doesn't really matter where you live. You could be, you could be in the Northern Territories of Australia, it's really hot, or you could be right up in the north, in the Arctic Circle, up in north of Norway, one of the Sami nomads up there, your brain still says 18 to 21 degrees, that's it. And this is really interesting, because when you first start saying 18 to 21 degrees, children often say, that's jolly cold, that's too cold. I mean, in here at the moment, the temperature is 18 degrees. So I'm running at the bottom of that. You see, I've had to wear a sensible thermal shirt. But very quickly they get used to it. And you can see here, this is from one of our schools across a year. So you see that before we put in the measuring equipment, the temperature was always too high. 18 to 21 is that green band that runs across the screen. And then you can see, once the children were aware of it, once they know that that's the best temperature for their brains, then they get used to it. And the temperature during the day across the year goes down and down and down. So the beginning of the year, oh, come on, miss, shut the window, it's too cold. By the time we get to the end of the year, they're actually running even a little bit too cold. So our children very quickly get used to all this, because they know their work is better, because they know they will be smarter, because they know they will be more alert, because they want to do their very best. So I think that's almost everything. We're measuring humidity as well. And the main thing about humidity, not too dry and not too moist. You want to have a bit of a runny nose, but not, when you get on an aeroplane, it's really, really dry. The humidity levels are very dry. It's quite hard to concentrate. You watch the movie, but if you try and do some work, it's quite hard to do it because it's too dry. So that's where we are with all this. And it's been really interesting. We're looking to see, how giving the children these numbers, actually everywhere, giving them the numbers on the door. We don't so much as say open the door, but open the door 60 degrees or open the door 90 degrees. We're really, really trying to see how good we can make the learning environment inside our classrooms. And we know that when we get it right, it gets a lot better. Here's the British Olympic team for hockey, because we're doing work with elite sports as well. And you'll see for the Olympic hockey team, who, by the way, won a gold medal in the last Olympics, you can see the walls are very bright, the light is very clear, there are multiple screens everywhere. This was before COVID, so everybody's sitting pretty close together. But these principles of making learning better apply absolutely everywhere, not just in our schools, not just in your homes, but pretty much the whole lot. So I promised half an hour to start with, so I'd better rush a bit if we're going to say any more. Only to say that we are very lucky these days because we have so much information. We can put children's heads into MRI scanners and look at which brain is active, which brain is less active. This is work in Illinois University, but they're looking at the impact of children moving. Keep moving before you do the test. Sit down and be calm before you do the test. You sit down and be calm, your brain starts to calm down. You keep moving, your brain is alert. So we're in a very lucky position to be able to measure everything, turn those numbers into excellence, really, and see in the end just how good the children can be. And we've been having a lot of fun with children in the SEK schools with them, exploring their own learning spaces. And look, I'll leave you at the end of this. This is from within the university, so everybody's interested in this. Here are some of the children from the SEK schools in Madrid talking to parents and university colleagues about the way in which these new learning spaces work. So a big thing about all this is the children get involved in it, and when we ask them to design better learning spaces, as we have done in the university, we've said to them, here's a lot of cardboard, build the space you'd like to come to if you're going to be an undergraduate. What would it look like? And they say, well, it's going to look like this. They turn up the lights, they build the furniture in cardboard and say, that's what we want, and then we can come along and say, okay, well, we'll build that space. That's exactly the space they designed. But you can see how bright and light and ventilated and effective it is. So this stuff really works. If you're in the chat window, I see there's a comment in the chat window, so I'm going to have a quick look at. And Asamir Zuzar, hello, it's good to see you there. And he's put a CO2 meter into a learning space and has seen how quickly the CO2 goes up from 500 to a couple of thousand. It really is. One of the interesting things about this is that, in the end, the children don't need these little boxes. These boxes are called learnometers. You go to learnometer.net, if you want to buy one, you can. But what's interesting is the children become very aware of the numbers. So if the room is the CO2 is too high, you notice that your skin starts to get a little bit sweaty. The air feels heavy in the room. So we know that immediately opening the door, but it isn't quite enough to open the door. And Jesus is asking about mitigation. So sometimes opening the door is not, opening the windows are not enough. And I think I can show you this here somewhere. I think I saw that graph go past a little while back. Yeah, so this is sort of interesting. These are classrooms where we're measuring CO2. You can see the measure CO2 over here. And the red line here, they've got the windows shut, mostly shut, and the door is shut. And very quickly in the morning, the CO2 goes up too high. And imagine if that was an exam room, those children would be doing worse in their tests than they would otherwise do. And then the green and orange lines, they've opened the window, but not the door. And of course, CO2 is a heavy gas. So it goes out of the window, but the bottom half of the room, the children are drowning in CO2, and only the yellow line there, they've opened the window and the door and created ventilation created through drafts. So, I think everybody now is getting excited about measuring CO2. There are places in Australia where we're building a school in Peru, in South America. Other countries have got numbers to try and get the CO2 levels down. But what we're saying is it's not just the CO2, it's the temperature, the light, the humidity, the pollution, especially the pollution, and all those other variables added together that add up. And just how big a difference are we talking about? And the numbers are really quite remarkable. I think if we were looking at an examination room and maybe we measured it all on the Friday because we've done this, and then spent the weekend painting and sorting out the room and changing the light bulbs. You don't need to spend a lot of money on light bulbs. The modern, the best light bulbs, the ones we were just looking at in the box, they're just regular light bulbs. There's nothing. You don't need a special fitting for them or anything. They just go straight in the wall. And if you do all that, then the children in the exam room will be, they're going to be somewhere around 3% better, at least on their exam paper. If you just get the temperature right, that's worth about 1.8% on their paper. If you do three things, that's probably heading for 5%. So it's really quick. And you think how hard your children work for their exam results, or how hard teachers work for their exam results. It's such a simple thing to do. But what I'm saying is the children become aware of all this. They suddenly start saying, hang on, turn the lights on, open the door, ventilate the room, let's do all that. Let's make our room better. And very quickly, they start to feel the results in terms of how they're doing. So I don't know if anybody in the video windows have got any questions about all this. I don't want to go on for too long because it's the evening, people need to get home, start eating. It's one of the things I love about Spain. But it's a long time till dinner. So has anybody got anything else they want to jump in and ask? You'll have to unmute yourself to do that, or type in the window. Well, I would also say, just in passing, that COVID has been really quite interesting in all this, because we've been looking, in the schools at obviously wearing masks and personal hygiene, limiting the number of people in a room, and having individual boxes so the students are only touching their own stuff. So as we look around the world, I think we're seeing people suddenly being really aware of the learning environment around them because of COVID. What we're saying is, before that, being aware of the learning environment because of your brain really matters. And I'll just put in the chat window, those of you who are looking, I'll put in the URL if you're looking at optimizing your home for home working, because I know a lot of you as parents will be working at home now, and you'll be get people talk to me about, oh, I've got Zoom fatigue, Therefore, typically it's not Zoom, it's the room you're in, And there's a question there just asking about, are any other countries limiting CO2 levels? It's kind of interesting that quite a lot of them limit the CO2 levels for office work, but not many of them have extended that into schools. And we've found, particularly in Dubai, we found the CO2 levels were incredibly high because it's very hot out of doors. And so rather than bringing in the hot air and chilling it with the air conditioning, it was cheaper to keep the air that was in the same room and just make it colder. So, the air just went round and round and round. The oxygen got sucked out of it. And we saw figures there of over 7,000 parts per million, which in an office would be in breach of the health and safety regulations. But what we're saying is, actually, for learning, for work where you need your brain, you've got to get it right down to under 1,000. And I wouldn't be surprised in all honesty, if it didn't go lower than that. Of course, this is very difficult because I opened the window to let my CO2 out, and you saw how it took nearly 1,000 off the CO2 level. But if outside there's a main road, I thought, what do I do now? How do I get? And that's why we come back to plants every time. Those plants really do work. And oh, thank you. There's the link to the working from home document. And by the way, there's a Spanish version, heppell.net/casa, CASA, which is also not a bad translation. So yeah, I think these figures are going to come down, and I think you will see regulation, because not just this poor little girl dying from pollution in England, but those 50,000 children and remember, those children in China, on average, lost 1 whole year of schooling by the time they were 15. So on average, that means that some of them were way worse than that, a few were better. But, average, it was always going to be worse and better. So, gosh, imagine having your child in the school there and, they lose 2.5 years of schooling before they leave it. It all seems so unfair. There's an equity thing in all this. Nobody else in Spain is looking at the details of all these variables as well as we're doing it in our SEK schools. But we have got a cluster of schools in Australia, with some in Tasmania, some in Queensland, some in Victoria, who are also doing this, and they've got that. And we're going to have fun swapping data with each other to see what we've improved and what we haven't improved. Of course, in Australia, the huge spikes in COVID infection has helped to focus people on all this. But you go to America, where you think there's a lawyer on every corner, and you think there would be lawyers following the children in, saying, "What are you doing to their exam results? I'm going to sue." But none of that seems to be happening. It will, but we're doing all that first to the SEK schools, and I think other schools for sure will follow us. Well, we always lead. That's what we do. I think that's probably enough. That's 45 minutes, and there's a lot there. Let me just say, this recording will be available through Blackboard, the more familiar way of talking to you as parents through Blackboard. We've got a number of parent-led initiatives coming up, so there's a string of things where we're hoping to help you to help your children to be even better. And there's a couple of things I can't tell you yet, but they're really exciting, that I think are going to be world leading. Nobody else in the world is doing what we're doing. So pretty exciting times. And thanks for your patience tonight. Thanks for listening. And I'm sorry this had to be in English. My Spanish is still appalling. But I think the pictures, and I've tried to speak slow enough, hopefully that will be helpful to you. So buenas noches, good night, and adios, amigos.